刚刚新闻当中提到了对华政策跨国议会联盟 IPAC， 至今已经有13个国家，超过上百名的国会议员加入。而慧眼看天下也透过了越洋视讯访问到了 IPAC 发起人之一欧洲议会的议员包瑞翰。Guten Tag, Herr Bütikofer. Ich danke Ihnen für das Gespräch. I understand that the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, was newly established just a month ago. Could you please begin by summarizing IPAC's purpose and objectives and how this alliance come together? And is the outbreak of COVID-19 a catalyst for its establishment?
Well, I would say that legislators from different parliaments around the globe have found themselves enmeshed in difficult issues in the China relations of all the different countries concerned. And we follow what happens not only in our own countries, but also in other democracies. So we learned that we are up against similar challenges posed to all of us from the Beijing government and the CCP regime. So basically, I think the next logical step was to simply draw the conclusion that cooperating and dealing with this together might strengthen each one of us. What we represent is a kind of an alliance of democratic actors internationally that want to deal with a CCP challenge together.
Yes, you once wrote that the most recent China strategy of the EU defines China as a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. Could you please explain why?
Well, this definition was first published in spring last year by the European External Action Service and the European Commission, and it's been adopted by the European institutions, including the European Parliament. And systemic rivalry means that we have very fundamental differences with regard to the values that either side stands for. We stand for democracy. Xi Jinping's CCP stands for a totalitarian regime. We stand for international rule of law and multilateralism. So that's the systemic rivalry that we see. On the other hand, as far as possible, we would, of course, want to cooperate on an equal footing pertaining to issues like climate change, where I think all countries should cooperate, if at all possible. And we know that we have to compete also, for instance, on economic issues. But what you cannot do is be a systemic rival on Monday and then for the rest of the week act as if you're not. So even the cooperation and the competition is shaped by the fundamental characteristic of this rivalry.
Yeah, Mr. Bütikofer, how do you see Taiwan and EU's trading and investment shaping up in 2020? And how is COVID-19 affecting our bilateral trade and investment?
Well, Taiwan is an important trade and investment market for Europeans in Asia. But we do not have an investment agreement between the EU and Taiwan. That was envisaged 5 years ago when the EU Commission published its Trade for All strategy, but it never made enough progress to really be put on the books. At the moment, we are pursuing very complicated investment negotiations with the PRC, which have not come to fruition, even though they have lasted 7 years now. And I don't think that, frankly speaking, there is a big opportunity for opening any new negotiations with Taiwan, as long as we still don't know how the talks with Beijing will turn out. But of course, the role that Taiwan played in the COVID-19 crisis alerted a lot of the public around Europe to the fact that Taiwan is indeed a relevant player.
Yeah, you just mentioned about the Beijing factor. Actually, in the face of the rising threat from China, U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo mentioned in the Brussels Forum on June 25th that the U.S. and the European Union should create a U.S.-EU dialogue on China to discuss concerns over the threat from China. And how do you see this transatlantic dialogue?
Well, first of all, let me say very clearly that I do not subscribe to the all-out confrontational strategy that Secretary Pompeo and President Trump are pursuing. Some of the characteristics of unilateralism that we've seen emanating from Washington are also troubling us. But we would indeed want to cooperate very intensely with the United States. So the statement from Secretary Pompeo that you quoted was his reaction to an offer from the European Union. The High Representative for Foreign Policy of the EU and Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Borrell, made that offer when he met with Secretary Pompeo and European foreign ministers, and Secretary Pompeo picked it up. I think that is very fortunate. There should be an intense cooperation, and the topics could range across the board.
Okay. And on June 30th, China just passed the controversial national security law for Hong Kong, and as a member of the IPAC. And how do you see this, and how will the EU respond to this?
I don't like the words national security law because it's not about national security in my assessment. It's about CCP takes 100% control in Hong Kong law. That's how I would call it. And it is abridging all the freedoms that have been guaranteed to Hong Kongers under the basic law. It's also doing away with Hong Kong's high level of autonomy as guaranteed in the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. So de facto, Beijing is reneging on its internationally mandated obligation and is breaking international laws. We think this very regrettable.
I guess most of the people in the world will agree that after the outbreak of the virus, Taiwan has done a fairly good job in containing the spread. But recently, European countries have started to open their borders after months of lockdown. However, Taiwan and the U.S. are not on the list. Do you know why? And what are the concerns? And what can Taiwan do to be included?
I am not privy to the deliberations. I have not inquired how the list came about. I can give you an answer as regards the U.S. The U.S. are not on the list because the measures that the U.S. government have taken to control the pandemic have not been very effective, and so we can safely say that there is a major risk emanating from those questionable management decisions that have been taken. As regards Taiwan, I would have to find out. Let me say, though, that a lot of people around Europe have taken note of the role that Taiwan has played. And for instance, I did organize a webinar with the representative of Taiwan to the European Union, where he explained the kind of policies that Taiwan put in place. And many of my colleagues from the European Parliament also joined me in efforts to advocate that Taiwan should be fully and meaningfully included in the work of the WHO.
Yes, Taiwan is a beacon of democracy in Asia, and we share the same values of freedom, transparency, and human rights with the EU. And do you think that these values play a role in Taiwan's efforts to combat the virus? And how can the EU help Taiwan expand its international participation?
As I just said, I think we should go about this in a very pragmatic way. So requesting full membership for Taiwan in the WHO, I think, would be a futile approach. That's not going to happen. But I think it is more than justified, and it is supported by the European Union, that Taiwan should be, as I said, meaningfully included in the work of the WHO. And similarly, with regard to other international organizations, I think we should address the issues step by step.
Yeah, Mr. Bütikofer, do you expect to see Taiwan's participation in IPAC in the future? And what can Taiwan do to deepen its cooperation with IPAC? Well,
depends on what range of the future you're looking at. I know that IPAC has been and will be cooperating with a lot of actors that are not members in IPAC. Cooperation on practical issues is not dependent on membership. I think the question of participation of Taiwan parliamentarians will be a bit complicated by the fact that none of the countries from which legislators are presently represented in IPAC do have full diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
Yeah, you are very good points taken. And thank you, Mr. Bütikofer, for your precious time and valuable views. And we look forward to talk to you more in the future. Many thanks and goodbye. Vielen Dank.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.